Hi, I'm Timm Esque.
And I'm Amanda Stradling. We are East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work.
Wellness, well-being, and mindfulness are trending right now as organizations try to attract and retain the best talent in this tumultuous post-COVID world. At the Leader Lab, we agree these are important concepts and overdue for being fully utilized in the workplace.
We also believe that these concepts only work when you treat the mind and body as a whole. We are excited to be part of a societal shift in attention toward the whole person. We invite you to join us as we begin to look broadly and deeply at wellness, well-being, and mindfulness in the workplace. Hi, I'm Amanda Stradling. This is Timm Esque. We are the East Valley Leader Lab, and this is our podcast, Mind and Body at Work. As always, if our content resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and especially here on our YouTube channel. Thank you for being part of this. So today, our episode is a little bit different. We wanted to take this opportunity to discuss the 7 episodes we've had previously with some wonderful guests. So no guest today.
That's right.
So each guest has had a really unique perspective about well-being, wellness, mindfulness, embodiment in the workplace. And today we want to review a bit and help pull out some really key ideas and help you make some applications in your own workplace, in your life. Some stuff that will be applicable to your organizations and all of the things that we know that our listeners are building. So our first episode that we aired, we started a little backwards. We were the ones being interviewed. We had Dan Winter and Elena Alexandra interview us remotely, and we got to discuss a little bit about our East Valley Leader Lab offerings. So if you are interested in our curriculum, some of our courses, that's a great place to start, that episode 1. Our second guest was Jeffrey.
Yeah, Jeffrey Cohen from ASU. Jeffrey is the Dean of Humanities at ASU, and there were a lot of other titles, and he's got a very important position there at ASU. And what we're going to do is just hit on a couple of the key points from each episode first, right? And then we'll come back and talk about some of the themes. So one of the things that Jeffrey talked about a lot, he had been at ASU for about 5 years. Prior to that, he had spent 20 years at an East Coast, probably considered a more elite school. And he made a comparison between how those schools tend to be very selective, and the mission and the culture at ASU is in the opposite direction. They want to give everybody a chance. So they're looking for, anybody who is interested in higher education, who's met the prerequisites, and they want to give them a chance. And as we'll see, this is going to come up, this idea of inclusion is going to come up multiple times in these interviews as we talk about well-being.
I liked that Jeffrey's work particularly proves that it's working, the things he's doing. He talked about how for a humanities course, the average retention from freshmen over to sophomore is like 50%.
Yeah, that's usually the goal at a lot of universities.
Yes, hoping for 50%.
Yeah.
But he was all about big goals, right? And they have a goal of 90% retention.
Yep. In the humanities school, yep.
And they've almost reached it.
Yeah.
Right?
I recall that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and he attributes a fair amount of that to this idea of inclusion. Another big idea is treating the entire college as a community. So he had stories about the well-being of students, and he had stories about the well-being of the faculty. I remember him talking about when they came back from COVID, everybody was concerned and everybody was struggling but there was a lot of fear among the faculty, right? We have to be here in person, with these young kids that may not be at much risk, but we are at risk. And so he talked about how when that became apparent that those concerns, were there, they backed off their aggressive plans to bring everybody back. And, they made changes to accommodate what the community needed.
I love that. In keeping the whole well-being of the community in mind, they were really also taking care of the individuals, which I thought that balance there was really neat. Exactly.
And there's more that we can bring up when we start talking about the broader themes, but the other kind of key takeaway I thought from our talk with Jeffrey was, he's authored several books, and his most recent one was about Noah's Ark. And in that book, they give an interpretation of Noah's Ark as really a story, one of the early human stories, and it's about exclusion. So we think of Noah's Ark as including 2 of each animal. But then it was Noah's family, and it excluded all the other human beings that were exposed to the flood. So, it kind of plays in with the inclusion piece. And over and over again, we heard how serious they are at ASU about including all the students, including all the viewpoints, making sure everybody's got a chance that wants to in higher education.
That's great. Our second guest, so our third episode, was also in education, Aaron Leatherbarrow, but known across TikTok and all of the other social media platforms as the punk rock teacher. There were a lot of big ideas in his interview.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. He's got a lot of energy.
Definitely. I love how he talked so much about holding space for the stories of the students.
Yeah.
Being able to tell their story, understand and process their story, having a support system to kind of receive that story, that's an important ingredient for well-being.
Exactly. And, another takeaway from me there is the power of expectations. So in the school system, they have these expectations. Okay, we're going to write an essay. We need to give you a topic to write about, and everybody's going to write about the topic. And he sort of blew that up and said, they don't want to write about that. I don't know what they want to write about. Let's find out what they really want to write about and give them that freedom. And so, that idea of we've got these expectations of each other and we all need to kind of stay within the lanes. It was really interesting how he was blowing that up in an effort to create a better learning environment.
Absolutely. Rigid expectations like that, and especially a lot of micromanaging. Well, we can get into this more as we talk later, but
sure.
He showed how it wasn't really working for the students for their well-being or their education. Yep. Another thing that he was doing that was really cool is he was stepping way back and looking at just their fundamental, most basic needs. He talked about, are these students fed? Are they coming to class hungry?
Right, the pantry.
Yep.
What do you call it? The punk rock pantry?
Yep, punk rock pantry initiative.
Yeah. Really getting back to basics, right? But he told a long story about discovering, that a kid wasn't getting fed before he came to school, didn't have a place to sleep, and it occurred to him that nobody's going to learn very much when they don't have their basic needs met. So that was a really, really good insight.
Definitely. Another thing a big idea for me that goes into his whole approach and attitude was that he would say no to a lot of things to help manage his energy and keep his passion for his work really high. If something wasn't really in line for what he was trying to create for himself and his students, he just wasn't going to do it.
I thought that was really interesting as well. In our classes, we do highlight the importance of being able to say no, and how that's not just an idea, it's not just words, it's something that comes from your body, and so we need to get the whole body involved to practice saying no. And he's turned that into a practice that he uses on a regular basis to serve his desire to create these bigger impacts for his students. Yeah, it was very impressive.
Yeah, and some of his bigger impacts goes back to the Punk Rock Pantry initiative, the nonprofit, where he's going around to many schools all around the country and trying to get this pantry installed and meet more kids' needs.
That's right. And he talked about, he's not really getting paid to do that, right? So he's got a part of his time that he spends in a job that gets paid, and then he's got another school that he works at, but he doesn't want to be part of the system, so he comes in and he consults and mentors.
Yep.
And then he's got this third piece, and that and his family are what he has time for, and he says no to just about everything else.
Yep. Yeah. So that was a very interesting approach to balance, I thought.
Yep.
Our fourth guest was Sherry Richmond, she works at a naturopathic doctor's office here in the Valley, locally. And her specific offering, her specific trade is neurofeedback, which is pretty cool. It's something that I knew a little bit about before, but it's a workout for your brain. And I thought that she was able to really highlight because we think of mental health a lot, and that involves a lot of things, emotional well-being and our social connections, a lot of things like that. But neurofeedback is about the brain organ and keeping it healthy and functioning optimally. And she had some really neat personal stories of herself using it, as well as so many of her patients, and getting a lot of really good results with this brain workout.
Yeah, and the word workout is really draws a really important picture, right? And we sort of use that as well when we're doing Tai Chi, right? We're working out parts of the body, and we're drawing people's attention to parts of the body, their organs that they're not used to paying attention to. And she talked about that when she was talking about giving the brain a workout. You're finding those parts of the brain that aren't always working or aren't always working together, or that we don't pay attention to, and the therapies focus on those so that you've got more of the brain functioning at the same time. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Sherry has a really great, well-rounded approach to well-being practices in her life, not just for her brain, but also her whole mind, body, everything. She's a martial artist, a Tai Chi practitioner, massage therapist, all kinds of cool skills. And so she talks about how she personally uses a lot of meditation, deep breathing practices, how she does Tai Chi, she does Qigong, and then some of your more basic things that we need to always remember, right? Like hydration, sleep.
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Yep. She was kind of gushing about the environment that she works in, right? Because she's working with these naturopaths. Is it osteopaths?
Yeah, naturopathic doctors. Yeah.
And they've got these things to address a lot of root cause issues, and if they're not busy with a patient, they often will help each other out with things that they're dealing with. And she's got a pretty great job when it comes to personal wellness and well-being. Definitely.
But still, you got to remember to apply it, right, to your daily life.
Exactly. Yeah, and she talked about that, right, when we asked her, why is it that we've got these tools and resources out there, and you'd think it would be instinctual to take care of our own well-being, but we don't. And she was talking about how we don't make time for it.
Yeah, and a big reason was distraction.
Yes.
That's kind of what she said. Especially, she works with a lot of children. They're just so distracted, and the distractions are so highly motivating, like for your brain. A lot of dopamine kicks from screens and stuff that it can definitely sidetrack your well-being.
I can be a little bit skeptical about the naturopathic approach. I've got a daughter that's an MD, right? And I know how much investment went into that on her part, to really learn the science and the evidence-based aspects of health. And when we were asking Sherry about well-being and the difference, I think we asked her the difference between the naturopathic and
we did,
and the MDs, and I thought she gave a great answer. Of course, we all need medical doctors, especially when there's something bad has happened, but they tend to address the symptoms. And the naturopathic philosophy is to start with the root cause, right? Which makes perfect sense that there's gonna be a lot of preventive therapies and a lot of preventive things going on. It's more about health than about sickness. So,
absolutely.
I think that's something we end up coming back to in the themes a little bit as well.
Yeah. I think taking a more, just a more preventative and kind of holistic approach to our well-being is going to help the well-being of our organizations as well, rather than just kind of dealing with crisis mode once our employees are already suffering and not doing well.
Exactly. Our fifth episode was, our guest was Reina Montoya. She's the CEO of Aliento, a local nonprofit. And they're working with DACA kids and others that have an immigration status other than being a citizen. And like Jeffrey, who we talked about earlier, inclusion was coming up a lot. So first of all, they include, not just DACA kids, but anybody in the community that has that has concerns about their citizenship. They're offering services. They're including those people in this community.
Yes.
And, the DACA kids are, by nature, kids. Most of them are no more than their early 20s. But they include the whole family, right? Because it's a whole family concern.
Absolutely.
I thought that made a lot of sense. And also it's inclusion because they are a community of people that are being excluded from our general population, right? It has to do with laws and choices that we make as a country about who belongs here and who doesn't belong here. But they are here and they are excluded from a lot of things, and they can be excluded from being here with their family in the country. She talked about how they were influenced by the truth and reconciliation approach that's been used in places around the world where there's been terrible persecution, like Rwanda and South Africa, and I know places in South America, and I'm sure they're using that in some places in the States where different things have happened. What part of what was interesting for me about that was what they do in Truth and Reconciliation is they bring out the truth. They're bringing everything out. They're bringing out the whole story. So those people that have been wronged get to talk about how they have been wronged. Those people that have been accused get an opportunity to tell their side of the story. It's a very human approach. But what it kind of reminded me of is, and they're doing that because you need to get these things out and process them before you can heal.
Yes.
And, it reminded me of Amanda Blake's work when she talks about armoring. As individuals, we tend to carry, an emotional load of things from our formative years that we've put away and we don't want to talk about and we don't want to share. And there needs to be a process, there needs to be a place for people to share those things that they're going to be able to move past that and grow. And they're doing that
Absolutely.
systematically at Aliento, and I thought it was quite impressive.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's something we talk about in our courses a lot too, right? Kind of getting to those stories and noticing the armoring, feeling it in our bodies, and kind of tracing it back so that we can release it.
Exactly. And I mean, you could argue that our second course in our curriculum is about, really bringing out those stories from our past, really examining those stories for the purpose, right, of sort of rewriting them in a way that no longer holds us back for,
Yes.
for the things that we want to go do in the world now.
Great. Should we move on
yeah,
to
why
our
don't we
next
move on
guest?
to episode 6?
All right. Episode 6 was our martial art teacher, Peter Hill. So Peter Hill is also a middle school teacher of a kind of underfunded, poorer demographic school that struggles quite a bit with performance. But he's come in and really inspired these kids. He talks about kind of the importance of their mindset, and he helps them. So he has a book that he wrote called the Get It book, and it's kind of the name of his whole martial art curriculum, the Get It Integrative Arts. But it starts with, when you have a clear goal, you can direct your energy. So he really helps the middle school kids figure out what their goals are and how to direct their energy. And then he gives them techniques. So GET, techniques. And so it's really neat to see some of the turnarounds that have happened on that campus by helping kids get in touch with their goals.
Yeah, and you're speaking about these middle school kids as them, but as you revealed in that episode, you are one of them, right? You were one of them.
Yep.
A few years ago, you were in that place, and that was sort of your introduction to adolescence, right? Was
Yep.
Peter Hill's philosophy on life.
Yep. That was a huge turning point for my life. Absolutely. So the Get It acronym is kind of tattooed on my brain. When you have a clear goal, you can direct your energy through the verbal or physical techniques that best fit the situation. Use all situations to work on your inner skills and test it to make sure it works for you. Which that was an idea that hadn't ever occurred to me before I met Peter Hill, that I could be given information that I didn't have to accept and apply, that I could, that I can test it. And if it doesn't work, I don't have to use it. That I could kind of feel things out for myself and my body and my own experience and start to make some of my own choices and decisions.
Exactly. These are appropriate choices for you to make for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Just because they come from a place of authority doesn't mean that you are obligated to follow them. Not
Yep.
you, but any of us.
Yeah, it was very empowering for me, and I know it is for the middle school students that are there. And it was a little bit punk rock of him, right, to teach us all that we could test it. It's a little bit like Aaron Leatherbarrow in that way.
Yep. Very good. What else about Peter's episode?
So something else I really loved that he did, he talks about the importance of language and how it helps us sharpen our intent and our goals, helps us connect with each other. Language is such an important part of being human, but language isn't always clear. He talked about especially, English came from a whole bunch of other
different
languages.
Yeah.
And words can mean so many things. And so he uses symbols or like Japanese ideograms, Chinese ideograms to help really visualize a concept and create a picture for his students. Like, this is what love means. This is what being a warrior means. This is what intent means. And there's a picture that's very clear that helps people understand and really internalize some of those things and really get clear about their values. Language isn't just words anymore. It really can become part of you and the way you navigate your life. Another thing that I think he really talked about was how he said he was a professional student. I feel like that growth mindset, that's something he teaches a lot in his classes to his kids. Always having that white belt mentality, that beginner mindset that keeps your options open. It helps you take in new information. And so his integrative arts, his curriculum, really is so integrated. It's so many different things that he's pulled in to create this really rich fabric of knowledge that he offers. So I loved that beginner mindset that he still has.
Yes, he's always incorporating new things and synthesizing, easy for me to say, new things into his framework and his teachings, and yet, he does it in a way that it's not just added on, but it's integrated.
Yep.
Right? It doesn't just keep getting bigger. It's all integrated into a package.
Yep. And he reduces these big ideas down to their fundamentals. As a martial artist, techniques can get very complex, and they can get almost, the more complex they are, the less useful they become. They're easy to forget. They are even harder to apply properly. But if you can really understand the fundamentals, that's when you get to really use it well and keep yourself safe. And that's what he's doing with everything. And he said in that interview, everything's either a circle or a straight line. Inward circle, outward circle,
or a straight line. Yep.
And so he's boiling all these big ideas down for these kids to really the energy, the intent, and making it just so digestible for them. And it makes a difference.
Yeah, we'll come back to that some when we get to the themes. But it's worth just thinking about when we think about well-being in the workplace and well-being in action. There's so many different techniques to think about, but what are the fundamental principles? What are the things that a team leader or an organizational leader can do to make sure they've got the basic fundamentals in place, and or be trying out some of the few fundamentals and coming up with what they think are the right ones?
Good. Yeah, and just keep it simple, right?
Yep. All right, should we move to episode 7?
Yeah.
Which is the last one we're going to review, but then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the themes that cut across the episodes.
Great.
So episode 7 is Kay McDonald, and she was with us to talk about well-being from the perspective of companies, and particularly from the human resources perspective. That's her background. She has been embedded in organizations, and so has a lot of experience observing well-being practices, whether they be good or bad. And she also has specialized in implementing some well-being programs in large corporations. So I think some of the things that stuck out there, well, she talked about where has this recent interest in well-being in organizations come from. And she said the root of it really came to, insurance has gotten so expensive.
Yes.
Health insurance, as we all know, is so expensive. And corporations, that's generally included in what they're providing their employees. And so it's a big area to look for value and then cost cutting. And So the insurance companies have started this pressure to look for wellness and well-being in the employees of their client companies, right? Because if you're not doing the right things, people are going to get sick more often, and it's going to be, more expensive to insure them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the root of where this came from.
But I think companies more and more are realizing that there's a labor cost that happens when your employees aren't healthy and aren't doing well. The labor you miss out on them being able to do is valuable
Absolutely.
well as the interest or the insurance costs going up.
Exactly.
Also the loss of labor.
Yeah, so it started as a concern about insurance, but then I think it spread to productivity. She mentions the Gallup poll several times, and the well-known Gallup survey company has been surveying companies about well-being now for, I think, 15 or 20 years. We've referenced some of their findings before. But I wasn't aware of how much, what a role the insurance companies had in, sort of starting the interest that we're hearing about it so much these days. So she talked about some of the programs and services there are out there for organizations to choose from, some that she's worked with. And, I think she's been involved in some implementations that were driven from a vision at the top that this is the right thing to do. And she's also been a part of some implementations that maybe were at least perceived as a little bit lip service, right? Not necessarily being in the interest of the employees, but more like going through the motions to say that we've got this covered. And I spent quite a bit of time in corporations, and I've seen those same two sides of that. One example of a positive one that I saw a few years ago, one of my last consulting clients was Google, and I spent a few years there, and they talked a lot about psychological safety. We've incorporated a little bit of that as well, right? Going back to inclusion, right? Making sure people feel safe sharing their ideas, challenging each other ideas. That's up to leadership to make sure that happens. So the idea of not just doing well-being programs, but having it be part of the culture, part of the mission, something we'll probably also want to talk about in our themes.
Definitely. Because it kind of comes down to the intent, right? And leaders have to have an intent of caring for the people that they're leading. And I think people pick up on that so quickly if they don't.
Right, because it's not just the words again, right? It's in their body, and it's in their posture, and the way they show up when they're talking about things like that, as we also talk about.
Yep, and it'll be so much more impactful if that intent is there, and then it does create an environment of safety for the workers. So yeah. Yep.
And she also brought up balance, and I'm almost surprised we haven't talked more about balance in these episodes. So there's obviously work-life balance. So that's obviously part of well-being, right? If you're overdoing it, and we talked about that a fair amount in her episode. She had some good stories of, people doing too much, and what are workers' expectations of how much they should do, and how, it also depends on how interested they are in the work that they're doing, or do they feel like they're just being held with their feet to the fire. So there's a lot of variables in the work-life balance equation. But the other thing that I thought was most interesting that came up in regard to balance was, there really needs to be a balance between. So we've talked a lot about, what can the corporation do? What's the environment they create? What's the leadership that they need to provide? And of course, that's very important. But there is also a balance, right? The company can't be 100% responsible for the full well-being of the people that work there 8 or 10 hours a day. I mean, they shouldn't be, right?
No.
Each individual is ultimately responsible for their own well-being and the choices they make, in regard to work, in regard to play, in regard to their family, everything else, and how that impacts their well-being. So I thought
Yes.
that was a useful thing to call out. It's not all about what can the organization, what can the team do for me. It's also what's my responsibility, right, as an individual, every individual.
Good. And I think an environment that encourages responsibility is important as well. You can highlight the things that the company is doing and then also encourage, just let people know that that is their responsibility.
Yep. Once they've been included, then the stuff that Peter gets into, right, coming from a goal perspective, working on having the right energy, bringing the right energy to your techniques, the mindset, those things are ultimately the responsible of the individual. We need to encourage people, increase their exposure to what's possible, what's out there.
Good.
But then the individual is the one that has to do the practice, right?
Yep. Back to Sherry's practices that she brought up.
Yep. So that was that's our episodes to date, and now we just want to talk a little bit about the themes that we've pulled out.
Yes.
So do you want to get us started on the first one?
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about inclusion and community. Jeffrey at ASU working super hard on inclusion. Aliento all about creating a community for people that have felt excluded. Punk rock teacher including people by giving them a voice and meeting their very human basic needs. Creating a classroom that really is a safe space for the children and taking kind of a rebellious stance to kind of protect that, which I think is very inspiring. And even Peter Hill in his middle school, everybody's kind of working on the importance of this community and inclusion. Yeah.
What was the line that I think it was a new principal that came to Peter's school and said, this is an inner city middle school. I was expecting a lot more fighting, but I guess when everybody knows how to deal with conflict, you don't have so much conflict.
Yep. And that's exactly the case there. I think the inclusion, it's partly like it's felt, it's a culture, but sometimes it is very specific, and it's policies and procedures and systems that are spelled out, things that you provide, very specific ways that your company includes its people. And everybody, I think, had some examples of the specific things and the unseen ways that you include your membership.
Right. Jeffrey definitely had both of those from the College of Humanities at ASU, and the whole ASU culture, and the thing that stood out from me there is, none of it was by accident. He told a story of when he discovered that they had, he found one of his faculty noticed that a student was sleeping in their car, and Jeffrey thought, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to try to cobble together some kind of a way to help this person. But then he found out there were resources that, they had a process in place for when this happened to get that person into housing, and do a variety of things and provide resources. And, the more Jeffrey talked about it, ASU just has this incredible resource base for making sure people need what they have, and it includes the faculty and it includes the students. So I think this idea of being very proactive and building attention to well-being into your systems and your processes is really, really something. The places where it's working, they're putting some of that forethought in there and making sure that that's happening.
Yeah. The intent is there, right? And they're following it up with very specific techniques.
And resources, right?
Yep.
They're funding it, right? And not just waiting for bad things to happen.
So in your opinion, why do you think it's beneficial for companies to be mindful and beyond mindful to be proactive in meeting the basic needs of their people?
I absolutely believe it's directly related to productivity, right? If they've got people that their basic needs are not being met, they're not only not being productive, but they're I don't want to say they're pulling down the rest of the organization or the rest of the team, but they're impacting the rest of the team. Other people get concerned about it, right?
Yeah.
Some people get maybe have some resentment about it. Other people care so much that they're not getting as much done because they're worried about that person. There's so many ways that productivity gets impacted when people's basic needs aren't being met, and I don't just mean food. We're talking about people working in corporations. They've got enough food to eat, but it's their psychological well-being, their emotional well-being. Are they really being included? There are things that are fully the responsibility of the organization and the leadership, and then there are things that are outside the company that we also have to watch out for if they're going to be part of our team and be a productive part of our team.
Absolutely. I think that you get a lot of staff turnover if you are blind to this because,
Yep.
and that's costly too.
Yep.
And you can lose a lot of valuable knowledge and skills every time you lose someone that got too burned out because some of their needs weren't being met. So I think that costs the company a lot.
Yep. So the takeaway there is be proactive about well-being, be proactive about being inclusive, and community is also a part of that, right? You do it as a community and you address concerns as a community. You don't single people out.
Good.
Anything else about you want to throw in there?
Just also, I think that some of the the unseen but felt things that we do are the ways that we embody inclusiveness, like the listening skills that we're having for our employees and the way people feel safe bringing concerns at work to us. There's so many embodied skills, the way that we need to be showing up in our body.
Exactly. And as we know, and again, I think Amanda Blake has influenced us here, our embodiment happens at a certain period of our life. We embody our personality. And if you're going to make changes for that, if you're going to adapt to new circumstances in your life, to more productive circumstances, a lot of those conditions that were in place when you embodied your personality those conditions need to be involved in that change process, right? And part of that is community, right?
Yes.
All of us in our formative years had our family, we had other community affiliations, and you make these changes with community affiliations. You make these changes with a group of people that are interested in change and adapting and looking forward. So embodiment is an important part of any kind of change, and community is an important part of an embodied change.
Absolutely.
All right, should we move on to culture and environment?
Yeah.
Again, we heard this strongly through Jeffrey's stories about ASU and Raina's stories about Aliento and part of Sherry's stories with the naturopathic doctors and Peter's. I want to start with Peter's Get It program. He also uses, get is goals, energy, and technique, right?
Yep.
And he also uses the terminology intent, energy, and technique.
Yeah.
And the point there is there's a mindset. So it takes a culture and an environment to create a mindset in a community, whatever you want it to be. We're talking about a well-being, a positive well-being mindset.
Yeah.
And in the right culture, people are gonna show up sort of predisposed to caring about well-being, and that has to do with their intent, what they care about. It has to do with their ability to deal with circumstances, the energy that they bring to different situations, and then what they've learned specifically about that topic, about well-being or whatever it is. And so, fundamentally, if you don't have a culture and an environment that is encouraging that positive intent around well-being and a positive energy around well-being, doesn't matter how many techniques you have, it's probably not going to take hold. And that's such a powerful part of Peter's teachings that, of course, we've incorporated into ours as well.
Yeah, he talked a lot about values. Sorry. I think if you value well-being as a company, and not just as a mission statement that you wrote down one time, but something that your heart's really in, you're really embodying, that creates a culture around you. And then you use the other things like language, right, to restate that and help your team all be on board with that same value. Yep.
Another thing that stuck out to me about culture was in our conversation with Jeffrey. He brought up a saying. He wasn't sure if it came from a book or somewhere else that says, leaders bring their own weather.
Yes.
And he talked about how impactful that was to him. So when we talk about creating an environment as the leader of an organization and creating a culture as the leader of an organization, it all starts with you and the way you show up, right? And the intent that people perceive, not just the words that you speak, but the intent that people perceive every time you get up and talk about, what is it we're here doing together and what really matters, what are our values.
I think something that Sherry said can kind of tie into this, because if you want to show up in this way and you want to put well-being first, it really has to start with you taking care of your own body and your own mind and your connection there. And so you kind of need a personal mindful practice as a leader. And Sherry talked about how that doesn't have to be complicated, right? That you could have just a 5-minute meditation, some breathing exercises, learn a couple Tai Chi moves that you can do regularly. And Reina in Aliento, she does a lot of her breathing exercises with her group. And she would do some meditations with her people. So that's something you can even think about incorporating in your organizations once it's part of you, offering it to your people as well.
Exactly. And, we are each the leader of our own life. So, you may work in an organization where the leadership does not have well-being top of mind. And, you have choices. You can look for other places to work. But another possibility is you take responsibility for your well-being and you seek out those practices and you invest the time to do that. It's much better if the leadership and the organizations create an environment and a culture for these things. But if they don't, we all have choices.
Absolutely. That's such an empowering concept that we do get to lead our own life. I was going to say something about that, but just the importance of bringing Oh, being centered. We talk a lot about that in the Leader Lab.
Sure.
So even if the leadership or a lot of your job responsibilities aren't in balance and things are difficult, that it's possible to have practices that keep you centered even when it's difficult. So we use that word a lot in our courses. Something that came out a lot was the telling your story, having a voice. I think that's just so essential for any organization. If people feel silent, they can't be their most productive, and they can't feel that inclusion. So holding space for people's stories is very important.
Yeah, and it overlaps with inclusion, right? So it's holding places for their stories, but also making sure that the places where we get together to make decisions, everybody's a participant in that, right? Everybody's pretty much an equal participant in that. That psychological safety that Google thinks is so important. I tend to agree. I think it's closely related to well-being, right?
Absolutely.
We want to feel like we are valued in our place of work, in our community of work. And if we feel in some way excluded from that, or it's not safe to bring out my ideas, what I think is important, that's going to turn against well-being in a big way.
Sometimes we're not even aware of our stories that are impacting us, right? And that can make us not show up as our best self. If we have self-defeating beliefs that come from an old story, then that might impact the power that we're bringing into our work and our energy. So it's important, even if your workplace doesn't have a vehicle for telling stories like that, it's important that as a leader or as a part of an important community that's doing big work, you got to get inside your own stories and figure out what's going on there so you can show up and really achieve those goals that you're working at. Yeah,
it's a recognition that the stories and beliefs that became important to us during our formative years, during our adolescence, may no longer be the most important stories and beliefs and the most effective stories and beliefs for helping us with the circumstances and the challenges we have today.
Yeah.
So how do you move forward from that? And it's not something that we recommend people try to do individually all by themselves either, right? You really need at least a temporary community, a group of people, a cohort of people going through that process together, learning from each other's sharing of stories, and examining their own.
Yep. Find a space, right?
Yep.
That will hold that story.
Exactly. And we already mentioned the emotional part of that. Part of what happens, Richard Strozzi Heckler calls it somatic opening, right? There are these things that we've held in our bodies, emotional things, and we don't want to let them out at any cost. And the problem is that, we can then suppress all sorts of useful feelings and thoughts and ideas while we're suppressing those old emotions that we don't want to let out. So
totally.
That process of opening is really important. And it's not a natural part of a workplace to have a place to talk about that, but there are certainly opportunities out there to help people participate in those communities or bring in the expertise to your organization and get some help doing that.
Yeah, definitely at the Leader Lab, right?
Yeah, we offer those services.
Yep. That really flows into the importance of the whole person and our mind-body connection.
Yes, because, right, those beliefs came from circumstances and ideas and experiences that can be expressed in words, but they're also being held in our body.
Totally.
that in a way that you can't just use words to get them out. You've got to find ways of expressing through your body, right?
Yep. That's why we use Tai Chi as a practice so much in the Leader Lab. But I think that mind-body connection is important as an organization too, to just always remember and treat your employees not just as a brain that can get a job done, but as a whole person.
Right.
With a whole slew of needs and stories that we need to be supportive of.
Right. When you think about those ideograms that Peter taught you and now you teach our students and clients, most of them have a mind or a verbal component built in, and then they've got body components like the heart or a groundedness. They're rarely one or the other. They're usually components of body and mind.
Yes, they are.
And how are those things working together to create something, some concept, some construct?
Yep. It's great.
So, that reminds me of how Peter talks about, the influence that we have on each other through our words. Our words are like arrows, right? And if you're talking down to somebody, you're putting them down with those arrows. It's impacting them emotionally, bodily, physically, mentally. And, that's sort of psychological safety in a nutshell, right? If we all talk to each other encouragingly with lots of respect, still okay to challenge each other's ideas and have fun and get creative. If you're not, that psychological safety is about, the whole human being, right? How we treat each other as whole human beings, bring out each other's humanity, respect each other's humanity.
Good. Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yes, but not really a lot to add to that specific idea because that's so perfect. We need to treat each other as humans and connect in that human way.
Yep. With respect.
Yep.
All right. Any other major themes that you wanted to call out before we close out this session?
I think we hit all the big ones.
Okay. All right, then. We hope you found this useful. It was fun for us. Again, the intent was to review the hours of conversations that we've had so far about well-being with experts from many different perspectives to try to help you sort of apply it to your thinking about your challenges with well-being and the things that you want to do to improve well-being in your organization. If this is the first episode that you've listened to of Mind and Body at Work, this was a great place to start because now you know all the rich stuff that's in there. We really encourage you to go back and listen to the individual podcasts because the stories, we didn't take the time here to tell all the different stories, and they're really rich and they're really impactful, right? They're more than just impacting your ideas, they're impacting your body. And be aware that we're at about the halfway point in this season, so we'll do this again at the end of this season. We've already got several additional recordings of other experts with different perspectives. For example, we've got somebody who is at a silicon startup for several years, making good money, and quit that to come back to a small town in Arizona and help make that a better place to live, that community. Real interesting stories there tying into well-being. We've got somebody we're talking to from a end-of-life and life care and elder care perspective on well-being. We've got a social scientist who studies the impact of our egos on ourselves and on our community and on our leadership effectiveness and our well-being. And then I'm excited about another one of my mentors is the creator of generative leadership, and he's going to be one of our guests in the second half of this season. So please come back for more.
We even have an elephant researcher coming on soon, right?
That's right. That's right. I left
Yep.
that one out. That's going to
Yep.
be great. So the well-being of the herd, so to speak.
Yep.
So we want to thank you for being here today. This has been Mind and Body at Work with East Valley Leader Lab. Very important. There's going to be a link on the screen. We got the same link in the show notes down below. Please click on that if you'd like any more information about our well-being offer. It's called 4 Fundamentals of Well-being. And you can get, we've got a landing page with a video, just a little bit more time to learn a lot more about what it is we can do to help you. As we always say, if this content resonates with you, we would love for you to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube page or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And like we always like to say, be well and keep moving.